Spirit of things, because I notice they're already doing it here. Into December, I'd like to say, beat the holiday rush and get your new information now. I couldn't hardly resist that after I saw coming over here tonight in one of those mini lubes that said, beat the holiday rush and get your oil changed now. So I felt like what I just said couldn't be that much out of line. All right, since we seem to have had, or some of us did, a sticky time of it night before last, I'll give you a payoff. Some of this tonight, I have no doubt, will put some of you at least on the good foot. The premise, this may be one of two nights. The first piece of information for the map, sometimes known as the premise, I guess, in the city, is the complex consumes the simple. Those of you who can hear tonight, and as I said, I may have to run over into another night or so, on several occasions I've hinted to you that looked at a certain way for a certain length of time, it's not good forever. You've got to operate when the blue light special's on. But this, and the ways in which I'm going to try and flesh it out somewhat tonight, I'll quote myself again, can approach explaining a lot of things. Serves as a kind of measuring tool, although it's not a tape measure and it's not a transit. It is a kind of measurement with all sorts of things going on in the human nervous system and apparently human life outside your own particular nervous system, that I believe you'll find that this can chew up like a good $79 lawnmower. It is true, that is, the complex consumes the simple. This is true in every way imaginable. And of course I cannot talk about every way imaginable in one or even two nights, unless I talk real fast. But it is true, let's take some easy ones. It is true physically, it is true emotionally, it is true intellectually especially, as I will be taking some pains to point out. But it is true in other ways apparently outside the individual. It is true culturally. It is true technologically. It is true scientifically. It is true academically. That the complex consumes the simple. Let me try right quick and hit two ends of what should be a fairly wide spectrum. My good old example, let's take the physical end. The Europeans came over and they consumed the American Indians. The Spanish came over and consumed the South American Indians. And there's been other versions, but this one is known to our history, and some people find it to be, that is ordinary people, to find it to be questionable in some way. Forget questionable, it's inevitable. From any view you want to take, no offense to the American Indians, because many of us probably got some Indian blood. It's got nothing to do with that. But by no means, by no view whatsoever, if you are just walking around intelligent, can you deny that the Europeans, the crudest of them probably, were more complex by any definition than the American Indians. The outcome is inevitable, always. Now let's jump from that to what may appear to be another end of this spectrum that I was picturing for myself. Quantum physics consumes Newtonian physics, just eats it up. And there's no way to argue with it. There's nothing can be said. And we're not speaking, or I'm not speaking in some way that there is some final so-called objective reality to quantum physics or the establishment of American civilization vis-a-vis the American settlers. But I am pointing out that within any given context of looking at two groups of people, a dynamic involving two identifiable things, chemicals, thoughts, feelings, ideas, technologies, arts, the complex is there to consume the simple. The simple is there to be consumed by the complex. This covers so much, as I said. I think that I won't do any more than even warn you that I'm just going to ramble and rimshot it and bounce off of as many things as I happen to think of until the tape runs out tonight. One strikes me that is considered to be a startling, almost an unbelievable report that periodically reaches mankind, and that is cannibalism. You know why? That is, one kind eating its own kind is because it has interfered with the process. Not just cannibalism. Periodically, you'll read some little report that some biologist, some zoologist in Africa or somewhere will say that he heard good first-hand reports. He wasn't there. That under certain conditions, a lion ate a wounded leopard. And it staggers them. It doesn't stagger them the way that people seem to read this in the Reader's Digest and cringe about cannibalism of humans. But the whole thing seems startling that a kind will eat its own kind. Suffice it to say, all of you have got to be well read enough to know that this is considered extremely unusual, if true. But when it gets to cannibalism, it always comes out if you ask somebody, well, why do you shudder? Why does it seem so despicable? And they want to fall into some kind of this mishmash about, the sanctity of human life and etc. And plus, humans don't look all that. Anyway, they go into this kind of, I'm telling you what it is. That the process of the complex consuming the simple has been interfered with. A lion eating a lion, a human eating a human, you're killing time. You're wasting life's time, if it happened, because you're not going to get any better. It may keep you alive. It may kill you, however. But that is why it is so startling, because it's one level consuming the same level. It is really worse than a waste of time, but there are no words for it, and I'm not going to stop there, but I thought this might give us some rather stringent area that I could start trying to expand this. All human studies are involved with going back down this line. When the line in the process, you understand for the rest of the night what I'm talking about. If I keep saying the process of the line is all human studies of every nature, all human disciplines are involved, unknowingly of course, but they're involved with attempting. They're involved with going back down the line. They are all headed toward that which is more simplistic than where they are. This involves every field that you could think of. If I can wrap up again some pretty wide areas, just consider religion, psychology, science. They are all attempting to run back down the line. They don't call it that, but that's what they're doing. And by so doing, they are always studying the past, even those that might deny it, which I'm going to try and get you to get a glimpse of. Even if someone says we are not studying the past, I am studying a psychologist. I am studying live humans. I am making statistical studies. I am putting them through the mazes right now. A scientist says, I'm not interested in the past. I'm not interested in the Big Bang's theories. I'm not a cosmologist. I am here. I am trying to study today. I am up to today's theories. I am completely versed in the latest theories regarding the particles. So I am not studying the past, and they're incorrect. Anytime you are going backwards in the process, you are pursuing the past. The pursuit of the simplistic, the more simplistic, is the pursuit of the past. It is the study of the past. You might note that there is, to say the very least, a dearth of future studies. Now, I read periodically. They pop up. I'll see that Harvard or Berkeley or somebody even tries to set up a department of the future. They invite, I know that they have some councils that used to meet in the Rome Club or somebody, and there are people who say that they're trying to study the future. And I know there's been several of these kind of bourgeoisie books that supposedly are pointing out trends, not soothsayers, but guys who are passing themselves off as being intellectual, trying to deal with future studies. Now, I'm aware of all that, but back to what I pointed out to you. Please note the dearth of future studies. If anybody even tries it, it makes the news that somebody's trying it. I didn't keep track, but I can guarantee you this, whatever schools it was that put in futures department, if they did it over a year ago, I can guarantee you this, and I haven't checked it, but they're done for. Finished. The first quarter, some people may have shown up, but it has nothing to do with what you would normally think. It has nothing to do with just the lack of attendance. It had nothing to do with just, if this was some excuse, apparently the lack of good teachers and instructors or textbooks. It's not that. It's not that. Now I'm going to try to get you to see. Now listen, because I can put it pretty simply. It is just an astounding, in the sense that you would have never looked at it this way. That the nervous system is not set up to ever come across this. But now here's what it is. The past is always simpler than the one studying it. Now, I'm not going into any further. I can see, I guess what you people call mathematically. Again, I try to cover myself since Socrates heard voices and everybody else. I can see mathematically, and perhaps some of you almost get a glimpse of it. This is an indisputable fact in the three-dimensional world. The past is always simpler than the one studying it. And it doesn't matter who. If you had someone here who, let's just say educationally speaking, was more complex, man A, than man B. That we had a man who had a PhD in history, and he's studying the past. He's studying some new reports of some remnants they have found from the Sumerian age, and he is reading about it. And then next to him we have a man with a high school education, that he is less complex than man A. But both of them, if I could go into their nervous system, if this could be photographed or shown, and I could say, which you would probably agree three-dimensionally, that they would not, based upon the complexity of their background and their education, that they would both not get from reading this little syllabus about this new discovery, that they both would not come away from it apparently having learned the same thing or having the same impression, right? You'd say that most likely the man with a PhD in history would come away with a more complex impression of what he read. That does not matter. What he read, his conception of it, that is the past, is more simplistic than he is. The man with a high school education, who has very little background, he can't connect in as many ways what he's reading as the man with a PhD in history, so he comes away with a less complex impression of it than man A. But his impression of it remains simpler than he is. It is a mathematical, in fact it is a, well, I'll leave it at that. It is a fact. It's not debatable, it's not psychological, it's not theoretical. It is a fact. The past is always simpler than the one studying it. Thus you have, among other reasons, the unending popularity of the past. All the way from the concepts, the glory of Greece. I even use them as an example, and I assume that some of you are as probably well-reader than I am in history, that, the glory of Greece, that whole thing is a 19th century invention. That the Greeks weren't considered much of anything until the Byrons and some historians and people looking around for, evidently, well, you could say, people looking into some way to make up for the uneasy sentence that was being read out in the development of technology, and those that are apparently a little more poetically inclined looked around, being driven to that kind of noble savage drive for noble savage syndrome to appear. And so they invented the golden age of Greece. But anyway, the love of the past, the popularity of the past, all the way from that to antiques. How the hell do people collect antiques? And don't tell me that, well, that Chippendale looks a lot better than something you buy at Sears. That's not the point. If it was the looks, then somebody would be redoing the Chippendales, right? Somebody would be doing imitations of Queen Anne chairs, which I'm sure they are, but they would drive out antiques, especially since antiques, as far as I know, normally cost more than they charge for stuff at Sears of equal quality. So why? Why do antiques hang around? And some of you may be interested in antiques, which I got nothing against the hobby. But if you're going to sit there and let your own nervous system say, wait, there's something deeper than what you're saying, you're full of it. You're full of the same kind of stuffing that's in that Queen Anne chair. Or why is it, as much as I enjoy it too, that's not the point, but why is it that Bach still remains popular when nowadays the world is more complex in general, and you have guys and girls, I have no doubt whatsoever, I guarantee you, in undergraduate school, in the music department, at city colleges, can sit down right now, they're probably in the millions by now, and sit there in no time and write a brand new Bach fugue that unless you had them all memorized, they can play it, that they wrote, and you would not know the difference. But is there a demand for that? None. None, none, none. Why? Whereas people will scratch around just dying to find an heretofore unknown Bach piece when they can have brand new ones. And you can talk more about this and that and try to speculate or some kind of weird mystical, ooh, but I'm telling you what it is. And since I mentioned that this is always tied into the noble savage syndrome that pops up. Rousseau didn't start that back in the 1700s. This has always popped up. It is always people looking for something simpler than they are. And it's always in the past. Always. And so the past will never run out of steam. The past will never go out of fashion. Never. Now, the other side of that, the future is always more complex than the one studying it. This is absolutely as exact, as mathematically unavoidable as the first part about the simple, but the past being simpler than the one studying it. The future is always more complex than whoever is attempting to study it, to look at it, to think about it. Among other reasons, this is the futility of all ordinary predictions. It's why once you, well, if you want to look at it as being some kind of hobby of reading these kind of things that I see in the National Enquirer or somebody show up on TV and makes all these predictions, you know, if it's just some kind of simple hobby, it's no worse with you than watching soap operas. But as far as actual predictions, you do know, surely all of you, you've got to be snapped out of that kind of any new age or mystical syndrome that was plaguing you before you got here. Any idea that there's been humans, or Nostradamus, or Joseph and his many-colored dreams and eyeballs, or some idea that there's been people who made predictions and they meant something? If you believe that, you should go out on a date with that Queen Anne chair because you got a lot in common. There is no ordinary way to escape the futility of predictions, because no matter who it is, I don't care if they wear a turban, I don't care if they go into a trance, they can do anything they want to, they can take drugs, but for them to say that I clearly see the future, they're just as ordinary as they can be. They are as simple as they can be, because the future is more complex than whoever is studying it. You can't avoid that. Tomorrow is more complex than you are now. Tomorrow is more complex than today is. And there is no way that you can take a clear sight, make a real prediction, make anything other than futile, fruitless. And don't tell me something about, well, I predicted, it was a 5-pronged thing I had predicted for this year that I did last year, and by God, 3 of them came true. Don't tell me that. You just simply got to see. I'm not in an argument with predictors and soothsayers. You simply got to see, or I'm going to try to get you to get closer to having an ability to find it yourself. The future is more complex than anybody attempting to look at it. And nothing will change that. In fact, seeing it will change you, if you got the ability to see it. Some other areas. When I say that I'm just scouting around and ricocheting around, I am, as always, somewhat have a hope up my sleeve. We'll see. How about this? Every idea that man has ever had about a God has always been a terrifyingly complex piece of work. Has it not? Everybody from the Jews to the Hindus. Now, it's silly of me to make examples. Somewhere all of you have been exposed, I'm sure, to some Old Testament stories. And if you hadn't read any of the Vedic literature, at least you're aware of the fact that the Hindus have got these statues. And all the statues are supposed to be representations of the same cat, the same God. And most of them look horrible. And the Buddhist, now that Buddha's gone, and boy, I bet he's glad. Now that they think they're involved in some kind of religion, they got these paintings. These icons are just terrifying. But at any rate, what I was going to get into, that all ideas of a God are always terrifyingly complex. Let me don't just say terrifying. It's terrifyingly complex. Think about it. I guess most of you probably have been more exposed to the idea of the Old Testament God. But think about that sucker. Think about the stories. Are we going to talk complex here or not? You couldn't depend on him. He'd say one thing, and he'd say, I want you to do it, and then he'd disappear for hundreds of years. And then he'd suddenly show back up, and he'd say, I thought I told you to do so-and-so. And the people there would say, wait a minute, that's not what they said you said. And then he'd burn places down. And then he'd say, build them back up. And then he'd say, I'm going to kill everybody. And he'd say, I'll be right back. And then he wouldn't kill them. And then when they wasn't expecting, he would kill a bunch of them. Then he'd kill women. Then he'd kill children. We're talking complex. Seriously, think about it. Now you got to pull yourself away for a second about some judgment about, well, he was mad, or we were talking about good gods or bad gods. Complex, complex, complex. That is the dream. That is what drives people, and anything that an ordinary man comes up with of an idea of a super being is complex. But since man cannot make himself individually more complex at any given time, how does it come out? What it comes out is this being that is just a living bundle of contradictions and opposites. And that is more complex than the one imagining it. Because no one on this planet walking around free in society could get by with what the Old Testament Jehovah did. Not in one lifetime. They would lock you up. Somebody would shoot you. Surely you hear me. So we're not talking good or bad. It is like a cheap seat shot, the best that ordinary consciousness can do, to come up with an idea of complexity. It's just taking all the things they see that humans do. And it's got to be things that you don't normally do, or it wouldn't be more complex than you in your imagination. And you take all the things, disregarding any judgment of good or bad, and you whip them on this concept of God, and then you've got that terrifyingly complex piece of work. That's what it is. It is more complex, but it's not any better than you are. It is more complex, and I should have come up with another term, it is more complex, but it's on the same level as you. And so in a sense, it's not really more complex as I started out talking about it. It's as simple as you, it's just more compounded. Also, how about everyone in the city? It's always been true. The concept, if you want to expand it a little bit, of gods to heroes. Everything from movie stars nowadays, politicians, rock stars, rock musicians, that people have a hero, that people get molecules and hormones stirred up by seeing the guy walk out with a guitar, to hear his name. And they buy books about him, and they fantasize. The idea of a hero, not just a god, another human, the idea of a hero, the notion is that the hero is more complex, or at least his or her life is more complex than the worshiper, the fan. And that's it. Don't all you people look blank that you don't admit that you had heroes. If you had nervous system, you had some kind of hero, somebody that you dreamed about, or you read biographies about. You thought, boy, if I could just meet such and such movie star. Why? Now, you could have said, if I jumped out and said, why, and I didn't not do it in an accusatory tone, if I said, well, I'm interested in that, why do you find it to be a benefit to read about this person? And that every time you go, or the time you went to Los Angeles, and you looked up where they lived, and you hired a cab, and you drove past there several times, you just looked at the house. Why? What's going on? Now, you would come up with some story about that they're such an artist, that they bring so much to the work that they do, and blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you what it is. Anybody you had a hero, the notion is that they're more complex than you are. Or, and this gets into another area that I can't get into tonight if I'm going anywhere, that they are more complex, or slash, their life is more complex than yours. Think about it. Have you ever had a hero that you imagine was simpler than you are? It's not possible. And if that doesn't strike, if that doesn't hit you right, have you ever had a hero that you imagine his or her life was duller than yours, was simpler than yours? No. No, it's not possible. It is mathematically, quantumly speaking, it is not feasible for this to happen. That is at the heart of having a hero, even a dead person, which only human intelligence can still have trade with the dead. But people have heroes of the dead. But when you think about it, if you had a hero all the way from us, Julius Caesar, Thomas Jefferson, Pablo Picasso, Jonathan Swift, whoever it is, forget their art, forget any story that you would have, or forget their military victories, whoever they were. Forget those stories that you want to tell. Answer my question to yourself. Even the dead, can you imagine them being more simplistic than you? That's not even in the running, is it? Can you imagine their life, their years here on this planet, being lived more simplistically? That what happened to them was more simplistic than you. It will not qualify as a hero. The notion of a hero has got to entail the thinking that the hero and or his life is more complex, was more complex than you and yours. And after that, everything else is just, you got to try and say, well, this is why I admire someone. I like the way he plays. I like the way she dances. I like the way she plays roles when she can really get a meaty role and get out of her type. Yeah. I'm telling you. Let me bounce over to a apparently different area. Now, I assume many of you read enough just casually, or at least I bring it up periodically, to know this. And when I say it, I guess they've said it yet in the grand, wonderful world of quantum physics, but I'll say it for them. Physics is almost, particle physics is almost to a simple point that's becoming, again, complex. Can anybody smell that just from your casual reading? If not, I can give you a rule. Just past everything is itself again. That sounds pretty poetic, and it is. I can use it psychologically, intellectually, emotionally, but I am telling you, not even having a degree in physics by any means, but I'm telling you it is also true in what is known as the natural physical world. At the 3D level, it's not the end of it now because I'm still dealing with words in the 3D level, but right past everything, I repeat one more time, this does not exempt physics, chemistry, but let's stick with physics for the moment. The natural world, as observed by city science, right past everything is itself again. Always at that level. Little twinklings of this pop up in areas like the old, very old idea from the East of the universe, the life of man being represented as the snake swallowing its own scale. The idea in other areas of eternal reoccurrence, just over and over and over and over and over. Very mild shocks, tremors coming from the reality of this. I am not going to predict, even if I had some good idea of what physics, where it will go after this. But since this information is available and pops up, the reports of what's going on in physics, even in the daily paper, some of you that do read such, watch it. Because they are to the point. And no telling what they're trying to describe it as now. Even I've read enough that they're on the point of even finding a certain amount of, some of them say humor. Some of them, I think I've read one guy claims that he has tried to brace himself for the ultimate surprise, which he thought might be a joke. They are to such a simple point, that is, of continuing to narrow down, to make the complex simple, simple, simple. Which, of course, is what the whole thing of looking for the game of life, who threw out the first ball. Where did the Big Bang come from? How did it get started? What are the absolute, indivisible building blocks of reality? They're getting to the simple point, past which it is going to become complex again. But it is the same thing right past itself, just repeated. They will not notice that. I can give you that much of a prediction, which is not really a prediction. But they won't notice. If you live long enough that it does seem to take a serious turn, they'll call it a major breakthrough. There's going to be a serious turn. But beyond that area, how about another one? That right past everything is itself again. Another one of my time-honored examples, the reformed drunk. He's a drunk, and he's a reformed drunk. But all it is it's him all over again, just past himself. It's him again, just without the booze. It is not really a change. That they took one thing, that we had what appeared to be one situation of the man and the booze. And you could call that relatively complex to where he's attempting to go. What he wants to do is be this man without the booze. But right past the guy with the booze, the guy with the drinking problem, if you want to look at it that way. Right past that is the guy without the drinking problem. But right on the other side of that, it's still the same thing. It's just sans the booze. Which is why a reformed anything, if you've got any feel for the makeup of life, never smells right. It's got nothing to do with whether you approve of drinking or not drinking, to use that example, but a sincere, a city-bred, an ordinary reformed anything is not good company. You don't be locked up in a sleeping car overnight on a train with a man or a woman. They don't smell right. The hectoring they have about their past hobby, their kind of proselytization about their view, and oftentimes, many times, on the basis of, listen, it's none of my business, and I'm not trying to change you, but let me tell you how much better I feel. It's because it's the same thing. It's right past what they were, and it's them all over again. Except they don't drink. But it is them all over again. Well, was that too simple? Once I'm here, I can't resist a slight aside. What I was describing in one way, that is the kind of people, to use the statement example of a reformed alcoholic, and now he's a professional almost. In the beginning, let's say he was a serious or professional drinker in a colloquial sense, and now he is a serious professional non-drinker. And me saying that it's really the same thing. Psychology now refers to, of course, the drinking. In many habits, they now call it compulsive behavior. But can you see that both of it's compulsive behavior? That's why there's no change. Of course, psychology would not see it that way. That's, well, stopping drinking is not compulsive behavior. They'd laugh us out of laboratory. But some of you caught a glimpse right there. They're both what they're calling, they're both compulsive behavior. As long as I'm there, how about an aside to the aside? That compulsive behavior, that's been around, I guess, for a few years now. Not compulsive, addictive behavior is what I intended to say. But whereas a man was addicted to drinking to begin with, now he's addicted to not drinking. So, since you laughed and some of you thought you saw something, back your brains back up 90 seconds because I intended to say addictive. It was all right for compulsive, but it's taking it a slight step sideways, a little bit further. It's addictive behavior. They would call it the habit. They would call drinking addictive behavior, but I'm telling you, now his not drinking is addictive behavior. But they would doubly and fully laugh at that if I tried to say that. But they're both addictive behavior. Now we cleared that up, I was going to take you on a side and point out addictive behavior is, first time you hear it, I guess, if you're ordinary, is almost a striking term. Because it explains nothing new, but yet it sounds otherwise. As they would say in the city, and they don't notice this, as they would say in the city, they would have to admit, if I could hold them down and make their brain work just reasonably well, I would have to point out to them that, all right, you're saying that now addictive behavior is some kind of explanation. And they'd say yes. And I'd say, well, all you're doing is you have repackaged an explanation for the symptoms, as you call them. And you go, oh, no. It's much more than that. But it's not. It's verbal repackaging. And it seems to convey something new. It seems to convey some new understanding every time they do this. Not just psychology and not just that term, but every time somebody says, all right, we have been studying such and such in this area. And what we have here, in the past, have been called this and that, and it's been debated this way, but I'm going to tell you what it is. It's my term, and I'll stand by it. I'll defend it. I'll take the blame if you people find fault with it. The doctor says what this is. Listen to me. What this is here is addictive behavior. He says this at some seminar, and many people, other equally renowned and educated and complex psychologists and psychiatrists go, geez, addictive behavior. And they write it down. And that's for the rest of the seminar. When you can drag them out from wasting the slot machines there. For the rest of the few days, you hear it rippling around. People talking about addictive behavior, addictive behavior, addictive behavior. And not just drinking. Hostility toward women. Neglect of children. Greed. Anxiety. It's now addictive behavior. And it seems that we have made some progress. But it explains nothing. Nothing. But it appears to be otherwise. It appears that some progress has been made. Verbal repackaging. I was going to get on that someday soon, since I already brought up packaging the other day, but we'll turn the tape over. Just a second. Well, all right, how about a half? I would take if there's any hot. Back on. Just a second, folks. So we're waiting for the end of a 15-second pee break. Hurry up! Is Jesus, or was it Moses? O ye of little kidneys or faith? All right. Next ricochet. How about this? Time. And if you want any area to move around in, you can put time/history. But they are, it's another area where they are spurious. In fact, specious. Use of them synonymously, but Time and history, if it helps, is the perceived record of the increasingly complex consuming the simplistic. That is history. That's it. That is also, all right, give you a second, because some of you, I'm assuming it'll make a little more sense to say history. All right, now, that is also time itself. Time as perceived by people is the record. And when I say time now, of course, I'm not talking about some the ordinary runnings of history. I'm talking about right now, your sensation of time, whatever it is. If you could give one, if I said, what's your sensation of time now, and you said something about, well, the closest I can tell you about time is I was wondering how long we're going to meet tonight because I have got a relative coming in from out of town. I got to pick up at the airport at 11:30. That you had some sensation of something going on, so that time, apparently, presently with you, had some meaning, some practical meaning. It is still what I said. It is the perceived record of the continuing, increasing, complex, consuming the simplistic. Remember, this doesn't have to be with just people now. Events, occurrences, movements in space. Do you see that it is more complex? Now you got to listen, because it's so simple. That it's more complex. Here you sit, and I'm talking. Now you sit. Prop back, just sitting. And I say, all right, if you had any conception of time right now, perception of time that had some instant meaning for you, what would it be? And you say, well, I was wondering if we'd be through in time. I'm supposed to pick up somebody at the airport, and traffic's going to be bad probably since it's getting closer to the holidays, and I had to park a way off. Do you hear me? That is more complex than sitting there. Any sensation of time is your recording of the more complex consuming the simplistic. If I said, if you've got nothing to do tonight, nothing to do, and I said right now, in your brain of brains, do you have some personal perception of time, some impression of time? Your answer would be, if you can hear me now, you'd go, well, no, I'm here, and everything's fine, I'm enjoying it thus far, getting something. But if I said you don't have any kind of sensation, you're not recording time in some way, nothing you're waiting to see on TV, don't have a TV, nothing on the radio you won't hear, I don't listen to the radio, nobody's waiting on you at home, nobody, I live alone. You understand that if apparently a more complex situation, in the full sense of sensation, is not consuming a less complex, you have no particular recording that is sensation of time. You can say, well, I know that my watch is running, but the sensation of time is always the recording of the increasingly complex consuming the less complex. That's time at the 3D level. All growth at the 3D level is that process. That's it. Other than that is regression. Make it a little more personal or individual. You, speaking about you as an individual human, you began to die when your future ceases becoming more complex. Not necessarily physically, but you have then begun to die. Now I could also tie this in to one of those favorite areas in ordinary city life, adulthood. What is adulthood? Now some of you, if you're following this intellectually, you might say, wait a minute, you're going too far, because people continue to be complex after they get grown. People continue to go in school and etc. Do. What is the whole idea? What are the other bundles of talking molecules? Humans. What is their concept? What is their encouragement for you to act grown up? They don't use these terms, but it's, come on, be more simplistic. Grow up. Hey, let's get real time. And if they don't state it explicitly, it's these kind of implicit hints about, look, you're whatever age. You're 21. You've been away from home now several years. You've been arrested, as far as I know, personally, 8 times for drunk driving. You've been picked up for pot, a little cocaine. You've made 3 women pregnant. I'm using the male view. You've been kicked out of 3 schools. You've never had a job over 2 weeks. Come on. Now, come on. I don't mind a little fun. I was a little wild, but look, it's time to grow up. What they're saying is, it's time to become more simplistic. Now, what's her name? We know she's pregnant again. Go ahead and get married. I'll give you $5,000. I'll help you guys buy a trailer. You can come down and start work for me down at the store. And what you're saying is, you have got to be more simplistic. Now, it does not just come about through external apparent encouragement and influence. People do it to themselves. You do begin to die. This has been hinted at and guessed at poetically by rather mundane people in the past, but in religions and poetry and literature, all sorts of places, that the world is full of many people walking around who are dead. And I know in literature there have been writers who claimed that their hero actually died at the age of 21. The heroine died at the age of 19 when her true love stood her up at the altar when he was killed out in battle. That she actually died then, and she lived another 50 years, but she was part of the living dead. It does not have to be that kind of dramatic calamity. If your life has ceased to become, it's got to be in the process of becoming continually more complex every day. You are dying. And most people, it is not a reversible process. It's not a gradual thing. Well, someday it is and someday it isn't. If I carried this far enough verbally right now, some of you would say, well, yeah, it is. Because some days I do feel excited and I feel like my life's more complex, and then other days I don't have anything to do. You're missing it. That's true with everybody. It is whether you personally are continuing in the process that your future, your life is in the process of continuing to become more complex. If that's not true, I was nice and said you're dying. You're dead. You are. You are dead. It is what middle age is all about, as it's normally called in the Western world. They think middle age of 40 or 45 for men, and all this kind of doldrums or this kind of middle age insanity, that it just suddenly comes on people at 40. It starts with most men. Women have their own version. But men, it starts at the age of adulthood. That is when they begin to die. And they just begin to stink up the place around 40. But they have been dying for 20 years. They have been dying. All right? Look at it this way. Let me jump back to another fairly straightforward, simplistic way. Death, 3D death, is the reversal of that process. Just ordinary 3D death. The simplistic worms begin to eat you. That is what death is about. Now, I brought that up not to get some kind of smirk or laugh. Are you imagining the worms chewing on your toes? It is a literal fact. Just speaking at the most basic physical level, the more simplistic, that which is less complex than you, after you die, it starts immediately. The microbes, all the many organisms that are living on all of us that don't do any particular damage, once you die, it becomes a new feast time very shortly with them. They do work on you that they were never able to do while your molecules, while your cells were still alive, taking in oxygen, running the blood through, while you were still actively involved in the conversion of energy. But at any rate, back to the physically visible ones. Once you die and lay down, creatures, processes, systems, more simplistic than you, reverse that process. Now the simplistic consumes the complex. That is what death at the 3D level is. But now, looked at as I guess you would call metaphorically where I was, you can die before you hit the ground, before they shovel you away in the hole. All forms of death, all forms of regression, involution, is that process in reverse. Think of the many hobbies and interests people have in life that could fit into me saying it is an inversion of that which is endemic, that which is at the basic of all living systems in the 3D world, that is, that the complex consumes the simplistic. All right. I'll come back. How about this? The simplistic. And now I'm talking about humans as an example. Only one of all kinds. We have the simplistic and the complex in the chemical world, the mineral world, the natural world, the plant world, the world of ideas, the world of feelings. When the simplistic have their lives unexpectedly, that is, out of the pattern, unexpectedly made more complex, strikes me winning the lottery, a janitor. Are all of you familiar with this? It's not just a isolated case. Generally speaking, the ultimate payoff is negative. Oh, they may win $1 million. That's not the point. But surely all of you are aware of the fact it's hardly worth the news anymore, since so many states have lotteries, and since most of them are won by poor people, ordinary, simplistic, that is, their life. They are more simplistic than $2 million windfall would dictate. They would have never had $2 million in their life. They would have never had probably $2,000 in cash in their life. So we're talking now, you've got to surely understand that this has nothing to do with morality, finances, your social position. It is simply, take anyone, and I was using a working person, and their life is operating a certain way. Compared to them suddenly having $2 million, their life was simplistic, the occurrence of their life. And when it is outside of a normal pattern, dramatically, unexpectedly is what I was using. When it is made more complex, normally, it's a negative payoff, even if it would apparently be otherwise. That they are suddenly made something that they were not. There was a process of increased complexity put upon them that was not in the normal flow of expected events. And they hoop and holler, and they get drunk, and they call all their relatives, and they're on TV, and they smile and they wave and say, my life will never be the same, and as it turns out, they're generally right. And it's so common, as I said, it seems to get hardly reported anymore, at least on a national level, that a year later, they have spent everything they get their hands on, or they committed suicide, or they have killed somebody, their marriage is broken apart, their children are in foster homes, they are drunk now, perhaps being able to form better wine than Mad Dog, but their life is not what they expected. Their life is not what you would have imagined, that, boy, if that happened to me, what fun I would have, what fun they're going to have. In fact, the person then becomes almost a what? A hero. That fat, middle-aged, bald-headed janitor in Brooklyn was $5 million. You'd walk across the street to meet him now. Perhaps you don't put him on the same level as Julio Iglesias or Mick Jagger, but he is now almost a hero. If you didn't watch it, you might cut out that little photograph of him standing there smiling, holding a check, and think, God, what a guy. I'd love to meet him. Oh, not just a bum off of him, but I'd like to meet. Because now your feeling is, God, what a complex life he is going to have now. You know, you'd call it other things, maybe how rich an existence, not just money-wise, but now he'll be able to travel. He can buy things. His life, his existence, his very being is now, I'm sure it already is more complex than mine. Only that is worthy of being a hero. But as I said, look what happens to these guys that win. As long as I'm here again, We doing all right with this? I might also point out, look at the famous people in history, how common it is that they ended up almost on the bad foot. If you don't like that, look. If that didn't hit you enough, go back to my area from mortal heroes. How about to the gods? The Greeks, everybody else. The gods just had their hands full. Well, you understand now, in the Christian world, Jesus is considered God. Look what happened to him. Those that apparently get more complex by the ordinary imagination of people. Notice, and they don't look at it this way. But even when they imagine that, all right, I have as a hero, or my impression of gods. Go back to the Zeuses. I mean, we talk about Jesus crucified, that was nothing. When you go back to the Greeks, and that real thicker mythology, these guys would get crucified, dug back up, dried out, pressed, crucified again, run out of town, called back, shot. At any rate, again, the nervous system at one level being attracted to the sensation, without understanding it, of the more complex, still does not see that even its dream cannot go into tomorrow because that's more complex than they can imagine. And so what they're trying to imagine more complex is self-defeating. That is, the gods always get the short end of it. The heroes get crucified. They become drunks. They become dope addicts. They lose all their money. But nobody notices that. Not in any real sense. I know they're aware of it because they're the ones that told me about it, all these stories. But they don't see that it has a direct connection. Now, of course, in the same way they don't see that 2 and 2 is 5. But that's another story. Okay. Another one. In 3D land, if things could see themselves, let's imagine they can, this whole idea about know thyself and see thyself, or how good it would be if I could actually see what I was, which is ostensibly the basis of people sending off their money to have their handwriting analyzed, or to send off their tea leaves to somebody in Omaha to somebody can tell you what kind of person you are. All of that falls under the general category of people wanting to see themselves. All things, it would almost appear, which is not the point tonight, want to see themselves. But here's what I wanted to see, that 2 and 2 is 5. But that's another story. Okay. Another one. In 3D land, if things could see themselves, let's imagine they can, this whole idea about know thyself and see thyself, or how good it would be if I could actually see what I was, which is ostensibly the basis of people sending off their money to have their handwriting analyzed, or to send off their tea leaves to somebody in Omaha to somebody can tell you what kind of person you are. All of that falls under the general category of people wanting to see themselves. All things, it would almost appear, which is not the point tonight, want to see themselves. But here's what I wanted to try and cement your attention to regarding what I've already talked about. In the 3D world, if, or when, or if things could see themselves, they won't like it. That's a fact. Not psychological, not philosophical, not poetic. It's again a mathematical fact. If, let's just play, that if the people in the city can in some way, through analysis, through metaphysics, through New Age, through chanting, through attempting to recreate the Socratic method, if not the life of the old Athenian, in their own few years, in some way, if they could suddenly get to the point and in truth say, I know myself, well, let me expand a little bit, that I can see me, and all the ramifications that they would intend by that I am not clouded by prejudice about me, I don't have any delusions about myself, I can see me. If that were true, nobody, no thing, but nobody would like it. I'm being charitable. Nobody would like it. Why? I'll tell you why. Because if they could do that, they have stopped the process. And what they would be observing, without knowing it, they would be observing themselves in the first stages of rigor mortis. They would not like what they see if they could see themselves as I am right this second. Because to do so would require that this be stopped. It is not possible at the 3D level for anyone to see themselves as you presently are if you are alive and still in the process of becoming continually more complex. All you can see, whatever it is that you think you see, all you can see is a more simplistic yesterday version of you now. That's all that's possible. You can only see yourself after the fact. If it was possible in the 3D world, as people keep claiming throughout history under various descriptions, but they've always been claiming that, psychology, encounter groups, religions, mystics, what they're saying in their own way is, God, if I could just get some clear fix on myself, I'm just sure that all sorts of cosmic questions and problems would fall in place. People have been driven to feel that and to believe that. But if an ordinary human, if at the 3D level someone could say, all right, through whatever means, I can turn on myself and look at me as objectively. I can see me for what I am as much as I can see that cup. Not only would you not like it, and I mean seriously, and not like it doesn't begin to cover it, but what you would be seeing would not be you now. The very best you would be seeing, and the time element is really of no consequence here, but to give you something to relatively go by, you would be seeing you yesterday. And you yesterday is less complex than you are today. So it is not possible in the 3D world to get what they would want to call an objective fix on yourself. This has, I was going to say implications. I say that too much. So instead of saying that, I'll say this. If you can get a fix on what I just said, then some things I'm not even going to mention tonight will fall into place. The futility, as it's, all right, I can't resist then. As it's normally done, there's no way it can be done by ordinary people, the futility of attempting to study your fucking self. How many of you were involved in some process of that before you met me? Don't even raise your hand. How many of you were involved with a long time after you met me? Don't raise your hand. How many of you still feel many times that that's what you're involved with even now? Don't raise your hands. And I've been through this before, and at times some of you, I'm sure that your nervous system thought it was some sort of an attack, or I was trying to prove that I knew something better than you did or somebody else. But now some of you should be able to answer this quite calmly and just immediately to yourself with no rancor, no feeling about it. And that is, has your attempts to try and see yourself in some objective way throughout your time up until now, has it produced any results? And the answer is no. Simply no. Through any ordinary means, did you get any better at it? Not one CH, I'm sorry. Not one little teeny bit. Did you make any progress? None. Did anything change? Nothing. And yet you continued. Out in life, throughout life, all plots, all intrigues are the complex planning supper. When you bundle of molecules talking and listening do here, I hate to even, I'll just pack up the tent and leave for the night, shouldn't I? Well, since I was so good then, you deserve this. All plots and intrigues are the complex planning supper. But coevally are, take it simultaneously /or, it can be the simplistic planning questionable attempts at an overthrow. Questionable. Any of you that really got something off the first part, if the second part begins to gag you, but now you should have enough experience to know, drop the second part for the time being. Well, the complex in any system, we're not talking about just humans now, we're talking in chemical chain events, we're talking about in what appears to be natural processes in the weather, the movements of the geology of the planet, all things, not just humans. The more complex are always subject to being tripped up by the simplistic. Look what the Greek Senate did to Socrates. Look what that Roman general did to Jesus. And I don't want to encourage any of you people's melancholy, but I'm sure that probably everybody in here, if you could see it in the right way now, that you've had your foot pissed on by somebody in the past that really sticks in your memory because you didn't know how to describe it, but to you they were so inferior, it was so unexpected, that what they did, you can't believe that the whole situation of somebody that dumb, that crude, that less complex than you did that to you. But you're always subject to being tripped up, just here and there. That is the basis, I might point out. On the overall view, of course, this holds true, because on the overall view, you've got to remember, life itself is growing and expanding, while internally you can find areas that apparently death is taking place, that apparently involution is taking place. Now, we've been through this enough, at least intellectually, you can remember that. But this is the basis that science, in some of their observations, and especially in their theories, this is the basis of the ideas of regression, involution, that things are going downhill. The idea of chaos, which you can look at chaos as being a kind of unordered, unadorned, feral simplicity, is what chaos was. Which is, if you want to jump back to religion right quick, then I take you back to all the creation stories, from the Sumerians to the Greek mythologies to Judaism, was taking what? The simplistic, a kind of feral simplicity of chaos, disorder, and making it one step more complex. And after that, time, after that, history, after that, all of life has been that. That is the overall process, and it's inescapable that the complex consumes the simple. Within the full area of the life of life, the body of life, can you fit this in? The simple always seek to be ruled, to be dominated by the more complex. Always. It is true, I'm afraid we're going to run out of tape here, it is true in the so-called natural world. I don't mean just animals. It is true with the weather. It is true with chemical processes. It is true with the operations of electronics. But back to probably your favorite area, Homo sapiens. The simple always seek to be ruled by the more complex, dominated. And they have no need, they're not driven, they have no need, have no desire to comprehend the complexity of the ruler. The only need is to be subject to it, to bathe in it, to dance with it. Can any of you see, once I point out this example, what from otherwise three-dimensional views is almost some of the inexplicable folly of humans, that they will be led by, after the fact now, looking back at it down the simplistic line, reversing it, by madmen that you read about. And I'm not talking about just some astounding example. You start reading a little more history and you find out, well, here it was after some area, say in most of our backgrounds, in the British Isles, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Irish, that some period of time they had a madwoman, a madman on the throne. And nobody attempted to throw him out. He was an idiot. He was crazy. He talked to trees. He made dogs his prime minister. All right, now you're listening. I don't just take these examples and laugh. And it's true, and it's true now. It's going on in countries that have tyrants. It's going on that have military juntas running the place, that you can read from afar, and you can say, well, the people surely could rise up. Or if you don't look at it that way, you think, oh, the poor people. When the man is obviously crazy. That's not the point. It is, in fact, if you can see this before the tape really runs out, back through history, you find reports that there was the guy killed 20,000 people during his reign on the throne, and you'll find somebody writing whose brother and father was murdered by this king, executed, and they'll write rather compassionately about what he, oh, I'm sure he did that, but they take the ruler and all of his eccentricities as being not much more than that. Well, sure, he had a few little peccadillos. He liked to kill a lot of people. They are intrigued by, without having to understand it, it doesn't have to make any sense on the intellectual level, as long as the ruler is more complex. That's all it takes. And any idea of, well, yeah, he's complex, but he's nuts. Oh, sure, he's a little weird, but, you know, he's a king. We're just simple folk. We don't do shit like that. You wouldn't go out and kill somebody just because you're afraid that their son someday might try and attack your son to get the throne after you're dead. We don't even think like that, do we? And that guy said, no, you're right. And then they all leave and have a few beers and think, boy, those kings. Well, those rulers, aren't they something? And what they're doing, they're submitting to the need, the chemical, the physical, the mathematical need for the simple to be ruled by the complex, to be dominated. If it was otherwise, it'd all be done for, the king and the people. You cannot have the simple ruling the complex. Now, I'm not going into this because accidentally, I guess you'd call it, that is, within the body of life, these kind of room for things to have anomalies. This does periodically happen, but it is so short-lived and it is so far outside the mainstream of what life needs that it almost doesn't get recorded. If I was to pick an example, I'm sure I could think of one right quick, and some of you say, oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. You remembered it, but you would have never thought about it again. It's just like a little quirk. It's just life going, I ate too much. It's here and it's gone. The simple cannot rule the complex. That is dancing backwards. That is dancing off the dance floor. That is involution. All right, another one in the same general area. The more complex people, but I'll say people, are more tolerant of the simple. The more complex are more tolerant of the less so than the less so, or vice versa. This runs throughout history, all kinds of things that I may not have time to bring up examples of the kind that some of you should be able to come up with. What is just generally called tolerance does not run uphill. Well, if you want to start down at the crude level, who are the prejudiced people in the world? Just let's take it down to the level of religion, race. In our country, race. Who is the prejudice? It's all, they're referred to rednecks, the uneducated, the dumb, the deprived. What are they describing? The more simplistic people. That's all they're describing. Where do you find tolerance I'll repeat one more time, you people going by in a wheelbarrow for the first time. This really has nothing to do with social categories, psychology, race, religion. I'm just using examples that you people know out there to try and get you to see that there is a corner around which all this wraps, that ties all this together. When you get into more complex people, now out in the city it would simply be, you would think of it as being people who are better educated, from a better social background, have had a richer experience. People who've gone and visited other countries and other places, they're not as inclined to be intolerant about racial matters. You look at the Rockefeller sons and the grandsons. They spent time going to school at Oxford. Then they spent some time in the Peace Corps in Africa. And then they went and they did postgraduate work in Malaysia. I assume Malaysia has some postgraduate work. Don't any of you Malays write me. At any rate, then it seems obvious to say, well, all right, people who are more complex, just because of their varied, exotic, rich background, they tend to have a wider world view of things. You can say that, but you can save a lot of time if you could see it. There it is. Tolerance, even just running around the city, intelligence does not go uphill. The simplistic cannot be tolerant about the more complex because they cannot see it any more than they can see tomorrow. All it is foreign. All it is threatening. All it is dominating. Except they have not attempted, it's not wired up in things for them to subject themselves to that kind of domination. So to them it's a threat. To them it's another way. Of course, all this is still the matter of converting energy, that life is using it. But the simplistic cannot be tolerant of the more complex. Do I have to point out, I just sort of hinted there and almost said it in the words, the simple cannot really see the more complex as being more complex. Now they have their descriptions, they know that there is a difference. If I had a little more time, but not enough of you got a background, this is not just people, this is down to molecular level, this is down to cellular level, and it's not just limited to humans. The more tolerant, the more complex, is more tolerant of the less so than it can ever be vice versa. This has to do with what even out ecologically and biologically is known as the food chain. But it's a lot more than what you eat. It's a lot more than the shock of cannibalism, of one kind eating its own kind, that is, of interfering with this process. It's more than that. There's a food chain going on that is way beyond, not above, not below, but all around. It transcends the physical food chain. Again, I guess I'm going to leave a lot of this with you people that can hear some of this. Much of what seems to be inexplicable in history and right now is right there in that. That the tolerance does not go in two directions. The complex can perceive the less so and not vice versa. They only perceive a threat. They only perceive that which is beyond comprehension, which is always a threat, is always fear. But the simplistic does not see the more complex as being something to strive for. They cannot see it in that way. The nervous system is not built that way. That's why they must imagine a compounding of their own simplicity to come up with ideas of God. Because they cannot turn around at the 3D level in the city and look upon another human and see the other human as being, literally, in the sense I mean it, more complex. Now the bricklayer with a 5th grade education from Alabama, from Mississippi, can turn around and find himself standing on a street corner in a train station at the airport with one of the Rockefeller skins and see a kid and realize, all right, I've seen enough magazines, this guy's some kind of big shot, just the way that kind of silly look that those kind of Ivy Leaguers have, and his tie and the kind of baggage he's got. He knows that in a sense that this person is more complex. He came up in a chauffeured limousine. Somebody's carrying his bags, a guy in a uniform. But he does not see it as being more complex in the sense I'm saying as being something admirable. He does not see it as that could be me tomorrow. That could be humanity tomorrow. He does not see it in a positive way. The simplistic, the less complex cannot see the more complex correctly. They cannot literally perceive them as being more complex. They perceive them as being that which is a source of fear. It could be dominance that I do not want to subject myself to. It could be a dance that I am not prepared to dance. I don't want to dance. This does not, of course, mean that you can turn it absolutely around. It does not mean that the more complex. It does not mean that the Dodges and the Mellons and the Ford families, look upon us simple folks, or you simple folks, and see you. It's not that. I don't mean in some real sense. But they can see that you are just at the mechanical level, just at the city level. They can see that other people are not as complex as they are. And that is the basis of me saying that they are more tolerant. As I said, it's not just people. It is true out in the natural world. It is true at the molecular, cellular level. Now, you do know that all of this has some pertinence to you individually, or I would not have brought it up. That all of the more complex consuming the simplistic has to do with you, has to do with your own nervous system, what seems to be the partnership. It also has to do with you and me. Among the few times I've tried, I could give you another verbal job classification of what I'm doing. Are you ready? And then we'll end the tape. That my job is to make you more complex than you otherwise would have ever been. Thank you and good evening. My job, all right, is to make you more complex than you would have ever been.